January 7th, 1944, 10:30 a.m. St. Paul's School, Hammersmith, West London. The room smells of chalk dust, damp wool, and cigarette smoke ground into wooden floors by 100 anxious boots. Maps the size of billiard tables cover the walls. Normandy's coast rendered in pencil lines and colored grease marks. Red arrows, blue arrows. Beaches given code names that still feel unreal. Outside, winter fog presses against the windows. Inside, the air is tight. Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery stands at the front of the room, spine straight, black beret angled just so. He holds a pointer like a conductor's baton. His voice, sharp, clipped, absolute, cuts through the murmuring officers as if silence were a formation he expects them to snap into. This, he says, tapping the Normandy coastline, click, is where the war in Western Europe will be won. You can almost hear the room lean forward. American generals sit shoulder to shoulder with British officers, Omar Bradley, Walter Bedell Smith, Leonard Giraud, faces unreadable, notebooks open, pens poised. These are men who've bled in North Africa, learned hard lessons at Kasserine, clawed their way back under Patton. They are here to hear how the greatest amphibious invasion in history will unfold. They are not here to be talked down to. Montgomery doesn't notice, or doesn't care. He paces as he speaks, pointer slapping the map with rhythm and confidence. He lays out the plan, a single, massive thrust. British and Canadian forces on the left, Americans on the right. Everything controlled, synchronized, deliberate. No improvisation, no cowboy heroics. I will command the ground battle, he says, flatly. Not a proposal, a statement of fact. There's a subtle shift in the room. Chairs creak. Someone exhales sharply. Montgomery continues, voice rising with certainty. He speaks of discipline, of method, of keeping the Americans from overextending themselves. He describes U.S. forces as powerful, enthusiastic, and dangerously impulsive. The implication hangs in the air, heavy and unmistakable. You can almost feel it land. Bradley's jaw tightens. Bedell Smith's pen stops moving. Montgomery doesn't soften the blow. He doubles down. In this operation, he says, there must be one master, one brain, and that brain must not be distracted by politics or divided authority. He looks directly at the Americans now. No one interrupts him, no one challenges him, but something fundamental shifts, quietly, invisibly, in that moment. This is not a coalition briefing anymore. It's a lecture, and the Americans know it. For Montgomery, this confidence feels earned. He remembers El Alamein. He remembers restoring order to a battered Eighth Army and driving Rommel back across North Africa. He believes, deeply, that victory comes from control, not inspiration, from precision, not flair. And he assumes the Americans will accept this. After all, they accepted British command before, in 1942, in desperation. But it's 1944 now. The United States Army that sits before him is not green anymore. These men command millions of troops, oceans of steel, skies filled with American aircraft. Their factories run day and night. Their soldiers, once mocked, now hold the line in Italy, in the Pacific, in the skies over Germany. They answer to Washington, to Congress, to a public that does not see itself as a junior partner. Montgomery finishes his briefing without hesitation, without apology. Silence follows. Then chairs scrape back, officers stand, polite nods, handshakes that don't quite reach the eyes. Nothing explodes, no one storms out, which is exactly why the damage is so complete. Down the hall, the Americans gather in tight clusters. Voices drop, words sharpen. Did he just say he'd command us? He talks like we're a problem to be managed. This isn't how allies talk. Within hours, the mood spreads. Within days, it reaches Supreme Headquarters. General Dwight D. Eisenhower hears about the briefing not as a plan, but as a warning. Reports land on his desk describing resentment, anger, a sense of insult. He knows these men. He knows what pride looks like when it's wounded. And he knows something Montgomery does not. You can win battles with authority, but you cannot win allies that way. Montgomery, meanwhile, feels satisfied. The plan is clear. The command structure, obvious. He believes he has asserted what must be asserted before the invasion begins. He believes clarity has been achieved. What he doesn't realize, what he won't fully understand until it's too late, is that this morning, in a quiet schoolhouse in London, the Americans made a decision of their own. They would fight, they would cooperate, but they would not serve. And soon, Montgomery would learn exactly where the limits of his authority truly lay. Section 2, The Silent Revolt. January 8th, early evening. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, Bushy Park, London. The rain has turned the gravel paths into mud, and star cars idle with engines ticking as officers arrive in ones and twos. Inside, lights burn late, typewriters chatter, phones ring, stop, ring again. War planning never sleeps, but tonight something else hums beneath the surface. Discontent. In a side office, Omar Bradley stands with his hands on the back of a chair, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed on nothing. He hasn't taken off his coat. Across from him, Bedell Smith closes the door carefully, as if the walls themselves might listen. That wasn't coordination, Bradley says at last. His voice is quiet, dangerous. Smith nods. He has Eisenhower's trust. He knows when something small is about to become something big. He didn't just outline a plan, Smith replies. He assumed obedience.
They don't raise their voices. They don't need to. What Montgomery mistook for discipline, the Americans read as dismissal. What he framed as unity, they heard as British control, wrapped in the language of necessity. And for officers who had spent the last year clawing for respect, the insult cut deep. Down the corridor, another room fills. Leonard Jarrow, Courtney Hodges, staff officers who survived Kasserine Pass, where American units paid in blood for inexperience and for listening too closely to British advice that didn't fit the terrain. They remember being told to wait, to hold, to follow. They also remember what happened when Patton took command afterward. Momentum, aggression, results. The war's changed, one officer mutters, but Monty hasn't. Word spreads quickly, not in memos, not in formal complaints, but in conversations that travel faster than paper ever could. Over cigarettes, over coffee gone cold, in cars rolling through blacked-out streets. The Americans aren't planning a mutiny. They're doing something far more effective. They're closing ranks. By the next morning, Eisenhower knows he can't ignore it. Reports from multiple channels paint the same picture, resentment solidifying into resolve. If Montgomery presses this, it will fracture the alliance at the worst possible moment. Eisenhower sits alone with the maps, Normandy staring back at him in 1,000 silent contours. He understands Montgomery's strengths, he respects his caution, but Ike also understands people. Coalition warfare is not about rank, it's about balance, and Montgomery has tipped the scale too far. The two men meet later that day. Montgomery arrives confident, brisk, almost cheerful. He believes the briefing went well. He believes he has clarified command relationships. Eisenhower listens as Montgomery reiterates his position. One commander for the land battle, centralized control, no deviations. You'll find, Montgomery says, that this arrangement avoids confusion. Eisenhower doesn't interrupt him. When Montgomery finishes, Eisenhower leans back slightly, hands folded. His voice is calm, almost gentle. Bernard, he says, the Americans won't accept that. The words hang there. Montgomery blinks, just once. I beg your pardon, he replies. They won't accept serving under British command in this way, Eisenhower continues. Not now, not after what they've done, not with the forces they're bringing. Montgomery stiffens. You can almost hear the gears grinding behind his eyes. This is not about nationality, Montgomery snaps. It's about efficiency. It's about trust, Eisenhower replies. Still calm, still steady. And right now, they feel you don't trust them. For Montgomery, this is baffling. He has never doubted American courage, only their method. To him, control equals protection. He believes he's preventing disaster. But Eisenhower sees a different danger. An army that feels disrespected does not fight with its full heart. Behind Eisenhower's words lies a hard truth, American political reality. Washington will not tolerate its generals being subordinated in perpetuity. Congress will not tolerate it. The American public, reading headlines, watching casualty lists, will not tolerate it. Montgomery is a brilliant battlefield commander, but he is not the supreme Allied commander. And for the first time since El Alamein, Montgomery realizes he is not holding all the cards. He pushes back, of course, argues that divided command risks chaos, that the invasion cannot afford competing visions, that history will judge harshly any failure born of compromise. Eisenhower listens, then answers with something Montgomery does not expect. History will judge us harsh on if we fall apart before we even land. The meeting ends without resolution, but the direction is clear. Montgomery leaves frustrated, irritated, convinced the Americans are letting pride interfere with logic. He still believes time will force them to see reason, that once the invasion begins, authority will naturally flow to whoever proves most competent. What he doesn't yet grasp is that authority in this war is no longer granted by reputation alone. It is negotiated. And as days pass, Eisenhower quietly begins reshaping the command structure, not to humiliate Montgomery, not to sideline him, but to ensure something more important than any single ego: unity. Montgomery will still play a central role, a critical one, but the illusion that Americans would quietly accept his supreme control has shattered. And the man who once believed he could orchestrate the entire battle from a single map table is about to learn what it means to share power in a war where pride can be as dangerous as the enemy. January 15th, 1944. A gray morning at Norfolk House, St. James's Square. Montgomery stands at a tall window, hands clasped behind his back, watching London stir beneath low clouds. The city wears war like a second skin. Sandbags stacked at doorways, blackout curtains half drawn, The distant rumble of lorries moving men and materiel east toward ports whose names are never spoken aloud. He has been thinking, and for Montgomery, thinking is dangerous. He replays the meeting with Eisenhower again and again, not the words, but the tone, that calm American certainty, the unspoken finality behind "they won't accept that." To Montgomery, it feels less like disagreement and more like defiance. For decades, the British Army has been his world. Clear hierarchies, unquestioned obedience, command as an absolute. Coalition warfare, in his mind, should still follow those rules. Someone must lead. Someone must decide. Why not the man with the best record? But the war no longer belongs to Britain alone. Across the Channel, American divisions are stacking up like thunderheads. Their presence is impossible to ignore. New airfields, endless convoys, young soldiers with fresh patches and quiet confidence. They are no longer visitors. They are the main weight of the coming blow. Montgomery knows this. He simply refuses to bend to it. That refusal crystallizes days later in another conference, this one colder, more formal. The command structure is laid out in precise terms. Eisenhower speaks carefully, deliberately. Montgomery will command 21st Army Group, British and Canadian ground forces. American armies will operate under their own commanders, Bradley foremost among them, answering directly to Eisenhower. Coordination, not subordination. Montgomery listens in silence. His face reveals nothing. Inside, something hardens. This invites confusion, he finally says. You cannot fight a battle by committee. No, Eisenhower replies, but you can lose one by alienation. For a moment, it seems Montgomery might explode. His jaw tightens, his fingers curl against the table. This is not merely a professional disagreement. It feels personal, like a rebuke, like a lesson he never asked to be taught. And yet, he does not walk out. Because even Montgomery understands one thing: the invasion will not happen without American power, and if he pushes too hard, he risks being sidelined entirely. So he concedes, on paper. The decision ripples outward instantly. American headquarters breathe easier. Officers who had bristled now feel recognized. Bradley, in particular, senses a shift. He will command the 1st U.S. Army during the landings. His responsibility, his men, his decisions. The line has been drawn. Montgomery, however, does not fully retreat. Instead, he adapts, selectively. In public, he supports unity. In briefings, he speaks of cooperation. But beneath it all, he still believes his vision is the right one. And when D-Day finally comes, he intends to prove it. June 6, 1944 arrives in darkness and surf. Montgomery is not on the beaches. He is at headquarters, tracking reports, pushing markers across maps as if they were chess pieces. British and Canadian forces push inland from Gold, Juno, and Sword. The Americans fight their way off Omaha and Utah in chaos and blood. The plan, his plan, demands the British tie down German armor while the Americans break out to the west. But war does not respect plans. Within days, Montgomery grows anxious. Progress around Caen is slower than expected. German resistance is fierce. Losses mount. The battle becomes a grinding attritional struggle, exactly the kind of fight Montgomery claimed to control better than anyone. He begins to issue suggestions, then recommendations, then thinly veiled instructions, directed at American operations. Bradley reads them carefully. So does Eisenhower. And now the tension resurfaces. When Montgomery publicly implies that American progress is uneven, when he hints that British forces are bearing the brunt of the fight, American patience snaps. Newspapers catch wind of it. Washington hears about it. Once again, Montgomery has crossed a line. This time, the response is sharper. Eisenhower confronts him, not angrily, but firmly. He reminds Montgomery of the agreement, of the trust he is straining, of the alliance that cannot afford another fracture. And in that moment, Montgomery finally understands something he has resisted for months.
The Americans are not guests. They are not pupils. They are equals. Not tomorrow, not after victory. Now. The realization lands heavily. Montgomery still commands, still plans, still fights with method and discipline, but something in him adjusts, reluctantly, begrudgingly. The age of unquestioned British leadership in the coalition is over, and the man who once assumed authority would be accepted has learned through quiet resistance and hard limits that command in this war must be earned every single day.
June 20th, 1944. Normandy, headquarters of 21st Army Group. The maps haven't changed much in 2 weeks. That's what bothers Montgomery. Caen is still contested. Red and blue lines overlap like scars that refuse to heal. Pins marking German panzer divisions sit stubbornly in place, daring him to move them with willpower alone. Reports arrive hourly. Casualties, ammunition shortages, villages taken and lost again by nightfall. This is not the clean battle he promised. Montgomery stands over the table, hands braced on the edge, beret tossed aside. Outside, artillery thumps in the distance, a low, ceaseless reminder that the war is not waiting for his perfect conditions. Across the channel, the Americans are fighting a different war. In the hedgerows west of Carentan and St. Lo, U.S. infantry grind forward yard by yard, blood soaking into Norman soil. It's ugly, disorganized, brutally aggressive. Exactly the kind of warfare Montgomery distrusts, and exactly the kind that is beginning to stretch the German line thin. Eisenhower knows it. Bradley knows it. Patton, waiting impatiently in England, can practically smell it. Montgomery, however, feels the narrative slipping away from him. In briefings, he emphasizes the British role, holding the German armor, absorbing the counterattacks, fixing the enemy in place. He frames American advances as dependent on British sacrifice. The words are measured, but the implication is clear. The Americans hear it immediately. So do their reporters. Headlines begin to tilt, commentary sharpens, Washington bristles. This is no longer just a command issue. It's political, public, combustible. Eisenhower steps in again. This time, there is no softness. In a private exchange, Eisenhower reminds Montgomery that coalition warfare is fought on two fronts, against the enemy and against fracture. He warns him, plainly, that any attempt to claim credit at the expense of American forces will backfire, hard. Montgomery listens. He argues less. Because now, the evidence is undeniable. American logistics are flooding France. Their air power dominates the skies. Their divisions multiply daily. And soon, very soon, the breakout will come not from Caen, but from the American sector. When Operation Cobra finally detonates in late July, it is not subtle. The American bombardment shatters German lines west of St. Lo. Patton's Third Army explodes into motion like a released spring. Armor surges forward. Maps change by the hour. Montgomery watches it happen. And for the first time, there is no irritation in his expression, only calculation. He sees it now. This is not 1942. This is not El Alamein. This is a war driven by American scale and American momentum. His role, still vital, still respected, is no longer central in the way he once assumed. The realization is not humiliating. It is sobering. Montgomery adjusts. He stops posturing, stops framing the war as a single guiding mind. He coordinates more carefully. He chooses his words with rare restraint. The sharp edges dull, not from defeat, but from understanding. The Americans didn't reject him because they were reckless. They rejected them because they had grown up. By August, as Allied forces race across France, the coalition finally begins to move like a single organism, not because one man commands it, but because its leaders accept but another's limits. Montgomery never fully abandons his belief in control. He never stops believing his methods are superior, but he no longer assumes acceptance. That lesson, learned quietly, painfully, reshapes the rest of the campaign. And it will matter profoundly when ambition once again tempts him to overreach. Because the next time Montgomery pushes too far, the consequences will be even more visible and far more costly. September 10th, 1944. Brussels. Late afternoon. The city is electric, flags draped from windows, civilians cheering, Allied vehicles rolling past in clouds of dust and relief. Liberation feels like victory. For many, it is victory. For Montgomery, it feels like opportunity. He stands over another map table, this one showing the Netherlands and the Rhine. His finger traces a bold, narrow line northward. Eindhoven, Nijmegen, Arnhem. A single thrust, one decisive blow to end the war before Christmas. Operation Market Garden. To Montgomery, it is elegant, controlled, daring, but disciplined. Airborne troops seize bridges. Ground forces race forward along a narrow corridor. Germany collapses. And in his mind, there is a familiar thought. If this works, everything else will be forgotten. He presents the plan with confidence, tempered this time, more careful in tone. No lectures, no dismissive language. But beneath the restraint, the old certainty remains. The Americans listen. Eisenhower listens most of all. He hears the ambition, he hears the urgency, and he hears the echo of earlier months, of assumed momentum, of faith in precision over contingency. But now the coalition has balance. The Americans are no longer reacting to Montgomery. They are weighing him. Eisenhower approves the plan, reluctantly, conditionally, because speed matters and the chance is real. But the approval is not blind. American commanders raise concerns. Weather, narrow supply lines, overextended airborne units. Montgomery acknowledges them, then presses forward anyway. September 17, 1944. Parachutes bloom across Dutch skies. Airborne troops land under fire. Bridges are seized, some intact, some already slipping away. At first, it looks like vindication. Progress reports crackle in. Montgomery allows himself a rare smile. But then the delays begin. Traffic jams choke the ground advance. German resistance stiffens where it shouldn't exist. Units everyone believed were shattered suddenly appear with tanks and artillery. The timetable stretches, then breaks. Arnhem does not fall. The British 1st Airborne Division fights in isolation, surrounded, outgunned. Radio calls go unanswered. Relief forces are miles away and might as well be on the moon. Montgomery watches the reports darken. This time, there is no argument about command structure, no coalition friction to blame. The responsibility is his. Market Garden fails. The war does not end in 1944. In the aftermath, Montgomery is criticized, openly, publicly, especially by American voices. They question the ambition, the rigidity, the refusal to adjust once the plan was in motion. But something is different now. Montgomery does not lash out. He defends his decisions, yes, but he does not belittle American forces. He does not claim sole brilliance or shared blame. The man who once assumed command would be accepted now understands the cost of overconfidence. The lesson from January never left him. Americans will follow leadership. They will not submit to assumption. By 1945, the coalition functions, sometimes tensely, often imperfectly, but together. Montgomery commands when it is his role. Bradley commands when it is his. Eisenhower holds the center, balancing egos that could fracture lesser alliances. And when Germany finally collapses, it is not under a single guiding hand, but under many, coordinated, negotiated, restrained. Montgomery remains a legend. So do the Americans who once bristled at his certainty. History remembers the victories, but beneath them lies a quieter truth. The day Montgomery learned Americans wouldn't accept his command was not a defeat, it was a correction.